Thank you. Mrs. Calamar will join us in a while. I'm pleased to give the floor to Mrs. Isabelle Gatiker, the Director General of the festival. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. It's with a very big emotion that we launched this very first event of our very strange 2020 edition. And it's very powerful for us as a message that you agreed to come, Ilse, Femke and Ruth, to Geneva. You agreed to stick with our agenda that is always committed to human rights violations wherever they occur. So we are here with Femke and Ilse van Velzen, together with journalist Ruth Hopkins, that are launching today a very special project that we talked about together in Amsterdam in November. The Private Security Network, a transnational network of 39 investigators and journalists from 21 countries. This network is linked to the film Prison for Profit that is still being presented at the festival in the Grand Reportage section, and linked to Ruth Hopkins' Misery Merchants. I can show the book. Here is the book. Investigating about the operations of G4S, a British multinational security services company and the world's third largest private employer. They investigated on South Africa violent Mongong private prison and exposed the system of G4S profit maximization works, including the working conditions of the employees, the inmates' right violations, including violent torture, and tax evasion by the company G4S. Their goal is now to develop a network to pursue investigation on G4S worldwide. They will present will have three main topics. First, the launching of the network. Second, a web portal, a platform, including investigations and videos on social medias. And third, a leak platform for whistleblowers. So I will briefly introduce the speakers. So Ilse and Femke. Who is Ilse and who is Femke? I knew, but some don't. So the two, they are two internationally acclaimed award-winning documentary filmmakers. Their last film, Weapons of War, about systematic rape in Western Congo, was awarded with the 2010 Golden Calves, the equivalent of the Oscars in the Netherlands. Ruth Hopkins is an award-winning person too, an award-winning investigating journalist. She worked as a journalist and editor with the Wits Justice Project in Johannesburg from 2012 to 2018. Producing a lot of content, including about wrongful convictions and various other criminal justice issues. So we are waiting for Agnès Calamar, who has a little contretemps, but is joining us in a few minutes, we hope. She's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Summary Executions. She was appointed in 2016. I'm sure all of you have heard of her. She's also the director of Columbia University's Global Freedom of Expression program. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Isabelle. And now I'm very pleased to give the floor to Ruth Hopkins. Before you start, I just want to tell the journalists who are francophones, vous pourrez aussi poser des questions si vous le souhaitez à la fin en français. Please, Ruth.
Thank you. Merci. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming, and also being brave enough to ignore the corona hysteria or actual virus. We are here today to announce... Is it on? Oh, okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? We're here today to announce the launch of the Private Security Network. This is a transnational network of investigative journalists that we, Femke, Ilse and I, set up following my investigation and the book I wrote and the film we made together. And the whole idea behind it is that we were investigating this multinational company in South Africa, and we realized that what was happening in South Africa was not an isolated incident. This was something that was happening worldwide with this company. And so we decided that actually what we need to do as journalists is also to approach this company from multinationally. So just to give you a bit of the background story to all of this, I used to live in South Africa. I currently live in the UK. And I worked for the Wits Justice Project, which was based at Wits University and was a group of investigative journalists who investigated criminal justice issues, among them prison conditions. And that's how I ended up going to Mangaung prison in Bloemfontein, South Africa. And this prison was run by a big British multinational private security provider called G4S. I investigated it for a year and then wrote my first article on what was going on in that prison. And what was going on was, if you see the film, you'll get a better understanding of it. But a very brief summary is that there was basically torture going on, electroshocking, forced medication with antipsychotic drugs, lengthy isolation of inmates, suspicious deaths. Plus, also the workforce at the prison was very disgruntled and dissatisfied and were also subject to very extreme levels of violence. So this was worldwide news for a few days in 2013 when my articles were published. It was picked up by all the major international news networks, BBC, CNN, Sky News, etc. But then it kind of died down, and the government said, "Oh, we're going to hold this company accountable," and then that also sort of died down. And they said, "Oh, we're going to release an investigation report," and then they never did. And so in 2015, Ilse and Femke, who I used to live in Amsterdam before I was living in Johannesburg, and we were friends, and I know their work really well, and they know my work. So we started talking about working together on this investigation, and we started that work in 2016. Ilse will be talking a bit more about the film that resulted from this collaboration called Prison for Profit. At the same time, I have been working on a book. I'm predominantly a print journalist. I have copies here, especially early release for this film festival. So if you're interested, you can buy a copy from me afterwards. It's called Misery Merchants, and it's basically based on the same investigation. So I investigated this prison in total now for 8 years, and wrote about, you know, how the prisoners were treated, how the guards were treated, how the government basically did very little to hold this multinational accountable, and also how this multinational got away with most of the things they did. I'll hand over to Ilse.
Yeah, so we worked on the documentary Prison for Profit for over 4 years, where we followed the lives of inmates and warders in the Mangaung prison in South Africa. And we are, well, very proud that it's premiered, had its world premiere at ITVA in November, and that it would have here its Swiss premiere at this great festival. So Femke and I are the type of filmmakers that not just make a film to make it and then move on to a new one. We really think it's important to start up discussions to really make a difference with a film, and that's also why we sat together with Ruth and said, okay, how can we actually have more attention on the private security industry and the things that are not transparent behind those walls. So that's why we also said, okay, let's start this private security network. Before we tell you more about the network, I'll first like to show you the trailer of the film Prison for Profit.
It is quite frightening to wake up knowing what is it that you're going to face. Should anything happen, obviously you are dead. But it's a job.
Mangaung Maximum Security Prison, the first ever privately run public prison in the country.
The prison is run by the international security company G4S. It's a huge company and it's profit-driven. I started speaking to inmates. He has these scars here. We're kind of the only journalists they can turn to.
We're dealing with high-risk inmates, gangsterism. Anything can happen at any time.
video footage shot inside the prison was leaked. And then I started talking to warders. I think probably up to like 70, 80 inmates that I've interviewed who said they've been electroshocked.
Somehow, I think I was part of that.
We were taught how to solicit information through torture.
They violated our rights.
Whenever services get privatised, costs go up.
An inmate is kind of a commercial entity.
We were beginning to see that we are used here. Things must change. You'll end up doing extreme things.
I'm not an enemy. No.
Will God ever forgive me for doing this?
Remember, hatred is something that you are not born with, you are taught to hate.
The revenue of the prison is over $630 million.
It's in their interest to have crime rates go up.
There's this phrase that they use. They say, adapt or die.
It's just all about money. It's all about profit.
Something for journalists in the room. If you want to see the film, we have a special link. If you just send an email, then we can provide the password for that.
So in talking with Femke and Ilse about our work, so the investigation I did, the book, the film, and how we could ensure that, you know, it wouldn't just be this once-off thing. And it was at the time when the Panama Papers and Paradise Papers, you know, they were making waves, you know, and this whole idea of journalists collaborating across borders became, you know, it certainly seemed like a very powerful tool. So we started thinking around that, also because the private security industry has outsized police forces and armies in the world. And the private security often takes on services that are very central to the nation state, such as incarcerating citizens, detaining immigrants, taking part in warfare and conflict zones, and they often interface with very vulnerable groups of people, such as prisoners, immigrants, people in war zones. And so we felt that it was very much an area that's unregulated, but also not monitored very well. And they're often, private security companies are often multinational, so, you know, they can very easily switch jurisdiction. And we felt it was really important, not just with this one company that we've been investigating, G4S, but the entire industry. We should really try and set something up that journalists become more sort of focused and involved in investigating and writing and producing content about this sector. And that's why we set up the Private Security Network. And so this is a transnational network of currently 33 investigative journalists from 20 countries. The numbers fluctuate a little bit. People join, others leave. And so the whole idea behind this network is to monitor and investigate this industry, and also to provide factual content on the website. And our sort of strategy is to investigate these the private security industry per company. So currently we've chosen G4S because it kind of makes sense, because, you know, I've investigated it, we've produced a film and a book, and it's also the biggest security provider, at least that's what they claim, on Earth. They're a very big company. They're the third biggest private employer. So that's why we do, and also they have a very long, bad track record of human rights violations in Europe, in Africa, all over the world, actually. And we noticed that there hasn't really been a sustained attempt to link all these different scandals and human rights violations together and to actually see, what does this say about this company? You find that when journalists write about, in this case, G4S, you know, it's very much nationally focused. So British journalists writing about scandals in Britain, but not linking it to, for example, what happened in South Africa or their presence in Israel. So that's the whole idea behind the private security network. And our mission statement, if you go to the website, you'll see it. It's that a sense of security is crucial to building and upholding safe communities. And by investigating and monitoring the global private security industry, we aim to increase awareness and transparency in this sector. And that's another element that, to me personally, I find really important, is that not just in the private security industry, but with privatization in general, it's not always these initiatives not always sort of originate along very democratic ways, or not a lot of democratic checks and balances. So laws are often very quickly adopted, and it's never really put to the electorate. Do we want to give, for example, the incarceration of our citizens to for-profit companies who are focused on their profits? So for me, this is also an exercise in kind of reclaiming this issue within a sort of a more democratic, transparent angle. So this network is very much an invitation to reclaim the democratic debate around the private security industry.
Yeah, so today we actually go live. So the website of the Private Security Network, the web portal that you will see behind me, is live from today. We have articles by journalists working and are linked to the Private Security Network. We also host articles written by about the private security industry by journalists who are not a member. So please have a look on the website. It will grow. So this is just the start, the kickoff. In the coming months and year, every time new articles will appear from journalists that are active at the moment writing articles about it. And then secondly, we also have a leak platform created, which potential whistleblowers can safely leak information if they feel it's necessary. They can do it on our platform safely.
And anonymously.
And anonymously, yes.
Are you? Yeah. Okay. So the way we've set up the private security network with these 33 journalists is that everyone in the network is working on their own national story. So, for example, our journalist in Colombia is working on how G4S treats unions in that country and G4S workers and various problems that have arisen there. And they're also looking in Colombia, for example, at the BP has a pipeline in Colombia, and G4S provides security for the pipeline and has been accused of aiding human rights violations. So, for example, in Colombia, the two journalists there, they're working on those two stories, but they're also feeding these stories back into global stories, because we want to produce national stories, but we also want to connect the dots, and do what we found that journalists weren't doing enough, and that's combining all these different things that are happening all over the globe and, pulling it all together and trying to understand, this sector and this company. So we're working on 6 global stories within this kind of model. So with journalists working nationally on all continents, basically, on these issues. One of them that I'm currently working on is around their private prison operations. So they run prisons in South Africa, in the UK, and in Australia. And again, you can see a pattern there that these prisons often, escalate into situations of chaos, violence, lawlessness, etc. And I'm kind of trying to understand why that is and how it happens. And then a colleague of ours is working on a story on how G4S treats its own workers, so security guards who work for the company. And this story pulls data from 6 different countries worldwide. And again, there's already a pre-existing pattern. So the G4S has a long history of strikes and workers' discontent and various union issues, and was actually about 10, 12 years ago was forced nearly, or was pressured, I should say, into signing a global framework agreement with the global union. And this story that we're currently working on is also looking at the question, what has happened to this global framework agreement? Is G4S actually respecting it? And what do the workers say? Another story we're working on is security for oil. I briefly mentioned Colombia and the BP pipeline. So G4S actually has quite close ties with the oil and gas industry. And so they provided security for Shell. They had a huge contract with Shell. They currently provide security for Chevron in the Niger Delta in Nigeria. And we have a journalist looking into that and looking into if the company is actually helping the mobile police and the army people in that area who are known to commit, human rights violations, and they're known to kind of suppress local discontent. And so we're looking into what role is G4S playing in all of this in Colombia, Nigeria, and also in Iraq, where in Basra they provide security for a big oil extraction there. And then we're also looking at G4S's involvement in migration. So they've run a lot of immigration detention centers all over the world, and they have run into terrible problems. I don't know if you remember, but about 2 or 3 years ago, the BBC Panorama screened this undercover program in the immigration detention center in London called Brookhouse. And they revealed like widespread culture of racism, violence, abuse, etc. In Australia, they ran an offshore immigration detention center that broke out in a terrible riot in 2014. And I think 1 or maybe 2 even immigrants died. And as a consequence, they did lose all the immigration detention center contracts in Australia. And they've actually recently announced they're withdrawing from immigration services in the UK. So that's another story that we're working on, looking at their involvement in migration worldwide. And another story is financial. We're looking at this is a very wealthy company that plays quite a role on the financial markets, is very focused on its share price, obviously, and is also known to have evaded taxes. In that sense, it's a typical multinational. They have a lot of subsidiaries in offshore, I was going to say offshore detention centers, but that's not what I mean. Offshore tax havens. And, for example, have already been investigated in Nigeria, Australia, and Estonia for tax evasion. And then lastly, we've set up a data journalism project within this investigation. And that is, at one point I read an article in The Guardian about G4S, and the authors pointed out that shouldn't this company be charged with corporate manslaughter because so many people placed in their care, in G4S care, are dying. So I mentioned the Manus Island riots, that people died and got injured. There was an asylum seeker in the UK who they held in a chokehold and he died. And so we've decided to, as a measure of kind of the harm they possibly are creating in the world, to count the dead, to count how many people placed in their care or employed by them die. So that's the 6 global stories. Al Jazeera is running the prison story and the workers story probably at the end of this month. So watch this space. And then all the other stories, like Ilse was saying, over a period of a year, we'll have like set moments where we release more investigations and content. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I have a quick question regarding links with Switzerland. Is there a link between G4S and Switzerland? And will Switzerland be a part of the network?
Well, G4S does not have a presence in Switzerland, but it does provide security for the UN. So it has various contracts with the UN, with UNHCR, for example.
In Geneva or in the countries where the UNHCR is operating?
I'd have to check that for you. I'm not entirely sure. But I know they do have several contracts with the UN and the EU. they're actually the EU's biggest security provider. And if you go onto our site, one of our journalists has actually written a story about the G4S's EU contracts. Yeah.
Before we take questions, I have also a question. What legal obstacles are you facing, or your journalists? Because this is a very important company, a multinational. So legally speaking, do you face already obstacles?
Not yet, thankfully.
No, when we released the film, we didn't got a reply back from them. Of course, we gave them a right reply that we put in the film, but they have not came back to us after the film was released.
And I think, I've been investigating this company now for 8 years, and I think, as a journalist, you just have to get your facts right, and then, because they've always kind of threatened legal action, but nothing ever happened. I think because I got my facts right. So that's also something we're very alert, that we're very cognizant of that within this network as well. Like, we won't just put out any article. We're really looking at, is this corroborated? Is it fact-checked? Will it stand up to legal scrutiny?
And in terms of impact, how is the film, the release of the film linked to the release of the whole network and the whole operation? It's quite. I think it's the first time there is such an operation linked between a film release and an investigation, right? So it's the first time ever.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, like what I said earlier, for us it's really important to create impact with a film. And when we got to this topic, it was like 1 + 1 is 2. To really make it bigger, we're taking it up against, or the film is about one of the biggest security multinationals. So to just do a film, it's not enough. So how we actually see it we see it as tools. So the film is a tool, the book is a tool, all the journalistic pieces are tools as well. The leak platform. To create something, I think, together and working together is I think very important. So from the film perspective, like when the film will travel to film festivals, will be screened at TV stations worldwide, we look for really sort of close collaboration with the people putting it out there. So we have close contact then with the festival organizers to make sure that when the film is underground, that it's connected to local journalists, maybe people from the union, action groups, so that that you also link it to the local context, because in every country, more or less, G4S has a presence. In every country it's different, so it's also good if you have a film in this case to see how you can link it, so it's also going to have an impact locally. And I think as a whole network, I think if you put all these tools together and work together, you also reach much more, and I think that's what we should do a lot more. So I'm really happy that we can start this project together.
Thank you very much, ladies. I think we will start with your questions. So the floor is yours. Who want to shoot first? Yes. Ici, derrière toi.
Je vais parler en français. Merci de votre présentation, de votre travail. Je suis Anna Aznaour, journaliste suisse indépendante. Ma question c'est, est-ce que cette multinationale tire financièrement un intérêt quelconque de cette violence qu'elle exerce sur les personnes? Est-ce qu'il s'agit des expériences? Qu'est-ce que c'est? Est-ce que c'est un système? Quel est en fait l'intérêt de cette violence financièrement, je veux dire, pour eux? Merci.
Well, that's a very good question, and that's actually something that all three of us have wondered. Like, why are there these high levels of violence? Because this company is a for-profit company. That's their main aim. So why are they allowing this violence to exist? I don't have a very clear answer on that, because I mean, if you put it to them, they'll obviously say that either say, you know, that there is no violence, or, you know, it's terrible, we're addressing it. So I mean, they'll never give you an answer. But I mean, I think if you look at a for-profit company, any company, with their workers, they will always try and keep the salaries down and the workforce down, you know, as small as possible. And you can see that in the UK with G4S, where a prison was run by the state and was then handed over to the private sector, in this case G4S. And the first thing they did was get rid of a lot of people. And then in a prison, you know, you've got the prisoners and the guards, and once the prisoners see that, you know, the numbers of guards are going down, they'll take advantage of that. So that's an element. I mean, another one, and this is speculative, another thing that you could analyze, I mean, that, like I said, is speculative, is you could also view it as, if they have a really violent prison, then they can always say, like, well, that's why you need us, because, you know, we're so experienced, we're a security company, you know, we want to, so that's why you need, you know, this very experienced private security contractor to actually deal with this. This is our raison d'être, you know, like, this is why we're here. But I mean, again, you know, that's speculative.
Do you want to add something?
No, I think those are the two major points. Yeah.
But also, like, if you have a chance, have a look at the film, because that will give you also a lot of answers.
Another question?
Ilse Femke, I would be curious to know about the pressures you had, Ruth. I can imagine, I can only imagine, but you also, as filmmakers, I first heard about Prison for Profit at the ITFA the year before, where you held a very special screening of the first trailer. It was a completely secret project. We couldn't talk about it. There was nothing leaked about it because you were fearing pressures by G4S. We actually invited them for the festival. That's very important to signal here. They refused to participate. Yes, very officially, very nice email, very professional email saying, sadly, we cannot make it to Geneva. We would love to. But very seriously, what were finally the pressures, and how did you make this world in such a complicated context?
Yeah, I think for us making this film, like, you know that you're making a film about a huge multinational, and there are more filmmakers that made films before, and they were pressured by big companies. So, I mean, for us it was really important to at least make sure that we could make the film, and that's why we sort of kept it really low profile. So, no posting online, just make sure only the people knew about us making the film that was necessary. And also, like, in a sense, like, you don't want letters from their lawyer while you're still in the making. So that were all sort of, we use a lot of measurements to make sure we kept on the radar, and apparently we did well, because we could release the film, and yeah, and that was for us the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Back to you, if you have questions. Simon?
Les États-Unis dans votre conférence de presse. Alors, dans mon impression, c'est que les États-Unis, c'est aussi un exemple typique de privatisation des prisons. Est-ce que ça fait partie du réseau d'investigation des journalistes? Est-ce que vous avez un commentaire? Est-ce que cette société, elle est britannique, sauf erreur, elle est aussi active aux États-Unis ou pas? Et puis, deuxième petite question, le film sera en ligne sur le site du festival bientôt ou?
If I understood correctly,
How is the film going to be available for viewers for the festival?
But there was something about the United States and America.
You haven't mentioned the United States.
Oh yeah, so the company G4S, as you I think pointed out, is British, and you're also very correct in that prison privatization in the United States is huge. At least, you know, they have a lot of privatized prisons. G4S does not run privatized prisons in the States. It does provide prisoner transport and immigrant transport. and also it has huge contracts like with the Bank of America, for example, so other private companies. And we do have an American journalist in our network who's looked both into the contract that G4S had for migrant transport to the Mexican border. And she's also working on this workers' story. So she's also looking into how G4S workers are treated in the United States. And it's not always very well. And so, for example, I think 2 years ago, G4S was made to pay $130 million in compensation for guards who were denied a meal break. So yes, we have included the states in the network.
Thank you.
It's over the film.
So the question about if the film is available for this audience of this festival, I think that's what the festival probably can answer best.
We couldn't organize it in 48 hours. As you all know, it's quite complicated to screen a film that is now distributed. But we will, of course, try to release it in VOD, but of course in close collaboration with the distribution of the film.
The reason because the film just came out, and we have contracts with co-production broadcasters as well, so that sort of makes it, we cannot just open it up online. So if the festival, for example, had more time, but that was very difficult to arrange, to have a closed off sort of section where people could log in only from the festival, then it would be possible. But just put up an open link, that means it's the end of the sort of festival or of the film's life. So in that sense, we're trying, of course, to reach as many audiences as we can. So I'm sure we make it available at a certain point, and then we make it also
through the festival.
Yeah, through the festival.
Thank you. We are pleased to welcome Mrs. Agnès Calamar, and I will give you immediately the floor, Madam.
Forward. Sorry. No, please. I won't take the floor. Happy to listen to the question and interject if I can say
so
something.
if you have questions for Mrs. Calamar, in French or in English,
exactly.
She will respond.
Sorry.
Okay. No questions for Mrs. Calamar?
Well, I actually have a question. I don't know.
Please.
I was just wondering, in your work, if you've come across issues related to the private security industry, and I assume you have, if you could give us some examples of incidents or issues or...
So I am the special rapporteur on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary killings, and in that capacity I investigate and report on killings or threats of killings by public officials, among other things. The issue of the privatization of security has been a major priority for my mandate, not necessarily me as a current mandate holder, but for a succession of mandate holders. And my predecessor has actually written a report on the topic, so I personally have not done a report because there was one done 2 or 3 years ago, just before the year I became special rapporteur. The key problems with the privatization of security, including of prison services, is one of accountability. The blurring of the responsibility of the state in context where it has delegated its what should be its hegemony over the use of force has created a number of gaps in accountability. In theory, the state remains completely responsible for all actions undertaken as part of a contract and on behalf of the state. In practice, it has not often been the case. The judicial processes are far more complex when they involve private security firms. Maybe not in the context we're discussing now, but in context where private firms are employed by a state to operate extraterritorially, that raises even greater complexities and gray areas regarding the responsibilities of the state. So the multiplication of the privatization of the prison services is also raising some serious issue regarding the commoditization of security and the commoditization, in that case, of prisoners and individuals, the cost paid for by the public for services that are often not always, but often below the recognized and understood standard. The difficulties of monitoring, because there is no, again, in theory, the official monitoring body, the state official monitoring body, should have a great role to play and should play even a greater role in those conditions. But in practice, this is not always the case. So all of those elements combine to create great accountability gaps for the rendering of accountability in cases of killings of prisoners or mistreatment of prisoners, and more generally in the cases where those private companies have acted because they can also be used for other services beside prison services. The international community has taken steps to address this by adopting principles on international principles on the responsibility of private security firms, including on their human rights responsibilities. So that's an important step. And in fact, those guidelines are pretty strong in that they do allow for some form of external monitoring process at international level, but they have actually been only recently adopted. So it's not clear how well they will be implemented. And in fact, there are, there is evidence that they may not be so well implemented, and that is pushing a number of actors in the field to demand a far greater legal framework to hold private actors to account for human rights violations, including those committed in the name of the state.
Can I just follow up on that? What if it is an international organization like UNHCR or another who is employing this firm, this private firm? What can be then? Who can be responsible for that?
Well, here we get into the topic of the accountability of the UN and the immunity of the UN. I am not very familiar with that particular case, but there are a lot of examples where the UN has proven not to be very forthcoming. The case I am most familiar with is Haiti, or where both the peacekeeping forces have actually used force in a lethal way, which fell outside the regulation. And that was one case for which there has been no accountability to date, or very little accountability, and certainly not individualized accountability. And then the other case I'm aware of is the one of the UN peacekeeping forces having been the source of a vast epidemic of cholera, which resulted in thousands of deaths. And for that case as well, there has not been accountability. So I am not familiar with the case you may have in mind, but I will think that it is further complicating a situation which is already characterized by a quasi immunity on the part of the UN, which is somehow enshrined in law, but according to special rapporteurs, at least, and the numbers of lawyers, this is a wrong interpretation of the laws of immunity, and it should not be applied to situations where the UN has failed in its due diligence and has itself committed in human rights violations. So I imagine that if those violations were committed by a private security firm hired by the UN, the responsibility of the UN is involved. Given, though, the context that I have just described, I suspect searching for accountability will even be more difficult than. But we can talk about the specificities of the case you have in mind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question? Yes, please.
Can I ask the special rapporteur, because it sounds as if with this company you have the so-called right of the investor, which we know nowadays is stronger than anything else. Mm-hmm. You have the rights of the workers, mm-hmm. who are often put under pressure by the company, and then you have the rights of the incarcerated people. Mm-hmm. How can you help us uncover different pistes, different tracks to unpack some of these complications?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I have the piste per se. My standpoint at the moment will be what is the responsibility of the state? So putting aside the responsibility of the corporate as an autonomous legal actor, which I can go back to, the first question we need to ask as citizens is what is the responsibility of the state for its hiring and monitoring of the practice of that company, and how is that being exercised, and what are the institutions that are already in place that can ensure that the company works according to the standard agreed by the country, by us, including the citizen. So my first focus as a special rapporteur is going to be on the responsibilities of the state. And there, in theory, it's very clear that the state is responsible for the responsibilities it has delegated to a private company. Under the law, including under the law of state responsibilities, the state is fully responsible for the actions of the contractors. In practice, it is not often the case. It is more difficult to find information on the abusers in the prison. It is more difficult to report on those. And as with, companies with many contractors and subcontractors, tracing the lines of command and the ultimate responsibilities within the state and within the companies become more difficult. Now, I think you're asking a question about the responsibility of the company as a legal entity, the human rights responsibility. My position, which is not a consensual position, is that non-state actors, and particularly corporate actors, have human rights obligations, including the obligation to respect the right to life. I'm saying that this is not a consensual position because the mainstream understanding of international human rights law is that it applies solely to the state. I'm not the only one who think that this is too narrow an understanding, and that the privatization of public services is compelling us to review that framework, and is compelling us to replace the corporate actor within the context of its direct human rights responsibilities. I am not, though, in the majority when I espouse that position, although I think there is more and more understanding that we cannot work on the assumption that the only duty holder with regard to human rights are going to be the state. And largely because of the privatization of security, of water, of a range of things that until 50 years ago were solely the premise of the state. So my position is that those actors have human rights obligations, that those human rights obligations are predicated on their capacities to have those obligations. They are therefore linked to their structures, to their role, and in particular to the power they hold over the people that they control. And the control they hold over the people or a territory or whatever. So it's therefore at a theoretical level, I will link the nature and extent of their human rights obligation to the nature and extent of their capacity to uphold those obligations. And in the case of those firms, it is very clear that they are the ones that have direct control over the people and over the premises. So they should be, in my view, the first duty holders. But there are no court at the moment, nationally or internationally, although internationally, yes, if they do commit crimes against humanity, they can be held accountable. But I don't know if those crimes that you are reporting meet the threshold. So below the threshold of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide, there is no proper way at the moment to hold those private firms to account for what I believe to be the violations of their human rights obligations.
What is the main argument of those who do not share your point of view?
So the main argument is a doctrinal argument. The main argument is that the international law is meant for state. International law is meant to define and constrain the role and the power and the behaviors of the state. And by including non-state actors, we are going to dilute both international law and the role of the state. So there is a fear that it will be made more difficult to hold state to account if we start incorporating non-state actors into the human rights legal framework, in a nutshell. And then, there are more technical question around the fact that those actors may not have so-called legal personality, and without legal personality you cannot be a legal actor in the international plane. But these are some of the reasons.
Thank you very much. More questions? Yes, please.
I'm Leo. I'm here with David Boys on behalf of Public Services International, the Global Trade Union Federation for Public Service Workers. Among the things which we do other than defending the rights of public service workers is fighting against privatization around the world. And we were lucky enough to have Ilse and Femke reach out to us about a year ago to discuss this film.
Your question, please.
So we've been working with them on the impact campaign for this film, and part of that has been building a platform called People Over Profit. The point is to build a global campaign against private prisons, and part of that is obviously divestment. So it'd be good to hear more from you both about what the plan is for divestment campaign on this issue.
Can I just point out, this is not a campaign, it's a journalistic network.
Yeah, what I'm pointing out is that we've been working with the directors on a campaign about ending private prisons, sure. Yeah, so I think something which we think is really interesting about this project in particular is the way in which we have this journalistic network, which obviously aren't activists, and then how activists can potentially use the research done by those journalists with campaign idea in mind.
Yeah, I think that's also it's important to say, like, the private security network is strictly investigative journalism based, so no activism and all those things. We as filmmakers have, with our film, can have a different role as well. we are not bound to being investigative and being strict to all the sort of more stricter rules that I think investigative journalists and journalists are bound by. So yes, Femke and I, we talked to PSI to see how can we connect the film, how can we work together. PSI has a big, broad network of partner organizations, and we are, I think we're still, and we're going to have a talk later on to make it more concrete to see how we can combine the film and our ideas to the divestment campaign. And as we have seen, divestment, I think, works, pressures big multinationals. So yeah, this is just something that we still have to further develop.
Thank you. Gabriele?
Oui, je voulais demander en particulier à Madame Calamar, est-ce qu'on a des indices qui pourraient faire penser que justement cette poussée à la privatisation ne soit pas due uniquement à des raisons économiques, mais justement de se mettre à l'abri des investigations qui pourraient être les vôtres ou les obligations que les États ont vis-à-vis de la Croix-Rouge pour la visite des prisonniers, etc.
Intéressant. Shall I translate the question or is it okay? No. Moi, je n'ai pas ces éléments de preuve. En général, quand on pense à la privatisation des services publics, on le remet dans le contexte d'une économie néolibérale et des poussées des 50 dernières années par rapport à la privatisation en général et l'économie, la recherche de profit, etc. Donc, je n'ai pas, en fin de compte, je n'ai pas réfléchi vraiment à cette question. Et est-ce que cela pourrait avoir joué un rôle? Je pense en fin de compte que c'est des concours de circonstances, y compris le fait que quand il y a une offre, quand ces compagnies existent, il est fort possible que l'analyse faite par certains départements publics, c'est que c'est mieux de travailler avec elles que de demander à nos propres staffs de faire le travail. Je ne sais pas, j'imagine que c'est un peu le cas. Je pense par contre que dans le cadre des guerres et des engagements militaires, je pense qu'il y a un calcul qui est fait, absolument, par rapport à la redevabilité. Je pense que l'usage des mercenaires, et donc les mercenaires de plus en plus font partie de compagnies, je pense que l'usage des mercenaires est lié à à l'idée que ça va être beaucoup plus difficile de faire les enquêtes, de déterminer la chaîne de commandement, d'attribuer des crimes de guerre à l'État, etc. J'ai fort peu de doutes qu'en effet ça joue un rôle. J'ai fort peu de doutes en fait que ça même joue un rôle en Syrie avec l'usage très développé de mercenaires qui travaillent pour les gouvernements syriens ou russes. Mais ce n'est pas ma spécialité et je n'ai pas réfléchi à la question proprement liée. Est-ce que la prison d'Afrique du Sud, l'État sud-africain a choisi la compagnie afin d'avoir moins de responsabilités. Je ne peux pas vous dire. Instinctivement, je pense que peut-être, oui, mais je n'ai pas les éléments de preuve. Did you understand the question? The question is whether the privatization of services, including security, was only motivated by neoliberal economy, or whether it could have been motivated by the understanding that it will be more difficult to hold the state to account. Mm.
Good question.
Yeah.
The ladies will investigate on this.
We'll get back to you.
I know that my colleague Sarah has a list of one-to-one questions and interviews. So if you want, we can take a last question and then Sarah will organize the one-to-one interviews. Last question? Yes,
Bonjour
please.
Agnès, Pierre Blattner à Genève. Vous êtes aussi en fait un exemple d'externalisation puisque vous êtes un spécial,
Une
et vous ne faites
rapporteuse
pas partie
spéciale,
exactement
oui.
de l'Organisation des Nations Unies. Donc vous êtes un indépendant qui travaille pour les États-Unis, enfin l'Organisation des Nations Unies. Alors c'est un petit peu un paradoxe.
Oui, mais enfin, moi, je vais pas. Moi, ce que je me contente de faire, c'est d'identifier les situations où l'État a manqué à ses responsabilités, de les mettre en avant, de les dénoncer quand besoin est, et de demander aux États qu'ils mettent en œuvre leurs obligations. Donc, je ne remplace pas. Je ne devrais pas en tout cas. Et si je le remplace, c'est pas parce que c'est moi qui le désire, c'est parce que l'État ne fait pas ce qu'il devrait faire. Mais mon rôle principal, c'est tout d'abord d'identifier les situations où l'État n'a pas pris les dispositions qu'il devrait prendre. Donc, par exemple, dans ce cas-là, si l'État d'Afrique du Sud n'a pas enquêté sur ces violences, il en reviendrait à moi ou à Neil Smelzer, le rapporteur spécial sur la torture, de dénoncer le manque d'enquête de la part de l'État et le manque de responsabilisation de l'État. Mais on ne serait pas en mesure d'enquêter nous-mêmes directement de la façon dont un service de police indépendant le ferait. Donc, je pense que les institutions des procédures spéciales qui ont été mises en place après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, etc., l'idée, ce n'était pas de privatiser la responsabilisation de l'État. Je pense que l'idée, c'était d'internationaliser cette responsabilisation et de mettre en avant le fait que la souveraineté nationale n'était pas si importante qu'elle ne permettait pas une scrutiny. Comment dit-on ça en français? Pardon? Oui, pas vraiment enquête. Que le principe de souveraineté nationale n'est pas sans limite et que dans des situations où l'État lui-même manque à ses obligations, la communauté internationale a un rôle à jouer. C'est ça le principe de base de la procédure spéciale. C'est pas la privatisation, c'est l'internationalisation.
Est-ce que ce rôle extérieur, externalisé, rapporteur spécial, vous sert? Non, oui. Non, est-ce que vous vous sentez plus confortable dans votre travail, qui n'est pas facile, d'avoir ce rôle de rapporteur spécial, d'être externalisé, comme le disait monsieur? Parce que vous avez à la fois un pied dedans et un pied dehors par rapport aux Nations Unies. Alors, est-ce que cette position-là...
Je ne suis pas... Donc, les rapporteurs spéciaux, les procédures spéciales ne parlent pas au nom des Nations Unies.
On est bien d'accord.
Nous ne sommes pas des employés des Nations Unies, nous ne sommes pas payés, en fait, du tout, par personne. Et nous ne représentons pas les Nations Unies. Donc, les Nations Unies engagent, entre guillemets, ou en fin de compte, les États membres, nous engage en tant qu'experts indépendants pour jouer ce rôle d'internationalisation du rôle de la communauté, l'internationalisation des principes, c'est-à-dire que ce qui est internationalisé, c'est le droit de la communauté internationale à un droit de regard. C'est ça qui est important pour moi. C'est pas la privatisation. C'est vraiment ça rentre vraiment dans l'après-guerre mondiale où on détermine que le territoire national, la souveraineté nationale peut avoir des limites. Et cette limite, c'est que la communauté internationale peut avoir un droit de regard sur les exactions commises par l'État contre ses citoyens. Alors que dans les décennies et les siècles précédents, il y a le principe est tout à fait l'inverse. Le principe, c'est que le citoyen qui n'en est pas un vraiment appartient à l'État et que l'État peut faire ce qu'il veut et que les autres États n'ont absolument pas ni le droit ni l'obligation de regarder ce que cet État peut faire. Je mets tout ça en avant parce qu'il me semble que depuis quelques années, ces principes-là sont remis en question. Donc il y a beaucoup d'États qui remettent sur la scène internationale le principe de l'intégrité de la souveraineté nationale, qui questionne le rôle de la communauté internationale et son droit de regard, et qui questionne notre rôle à nous en tant que rapporteurs spéciaux.
Est-ce que ça veut dire que ça pourrait vous limiter justement du fait que ces États essayent peut-être de limiter la portée de ce que vous pouvez dire?
Bien sûr, c'est pour ça qu'il faut combattre cette petite tentative de dévorer doucement mais sûrement le principe de scrutiny d'internationalisation de notre droit de regard. C'est très évident que de nombreux États ne supportent pas l'idée que les pratiques auxquelles qu'ils mettent en œuvre dans leur géographie, dans leur territoire, fassent l'objet de questionnements à l'international. Je prends à de multiples occasions, la Chine, par exemple, va déclarer très nettement qu'il s'agit ici de prérogatives d'ordre domestique et que la communauté internationale n'a absolument pas le droit de la critiquer. Elle va dire ça pour ses propres actions, comme elle va le dire pour les actions d'autres, en prenant la défense de ce qu'ils ont pu faire, même s'il s'agit de crimes. Donc, je pense qu'il est, pour nous en tout cas, et pour d'autres défenseurs des droits humains, il est très important que l'on s'érige contre cette tentative de replacer ce principe de souveraineté nationale et de l'utiliser pour empêcher d'abord de rendre des comptes, mais simplement pour empêcher que l'on sache ce qui se passe.
Alors, une toute dernière question. Est-ce que, pour vous, est-ce que lorsqu'il s'agit non pas du territoire physique d'un pays, mais par exemple d'une de ses ambassades, et si un crime, un assassinat a été commis dans une ambassade d'un autre pays, comment est-ce que vous êtes en première ligne dans un cas?
Oui, dans le cas.
Voilà.
Alors, oui, en fin de compte, ça c'était un cas facile parce que c'était tellement gros de prétendre qu'il s'agissait d'une question d'ordre national que, franchement, personne n'a vraiment accordé beaucoup d'importance à ces dires. Donc, dans le cas dont vous parlez, je pense l'Arabie saoudite a voulu prétendre que l'assassinat de M. Khashoggi sur le territoire turc, mais dans un consulat saoudien, constituait une histoire, une question d'affaires domestiques nationales et auxquelles la communauté internationale pour lesquelles elle n'avait aucun rôle à jouer. Donc, de toute évidence, c'était un cas facile on pouvait facilement répondre à cette situation. Le meurtre a été commis, d'accord, dans un consulat, mais sur un territoire étranger, et le meurtre constituait au moins 4 violations du droit international, dont la Charte des Nations Unies. Donc, bon, c'était facile à répondre à ce cas-là, mais oui, ils ont ergoté et argumenté que c'était une question de politique nationale, c'était une question qui en revenait uniquement au système judiciaire saoudien, et donc que ni moi ni aucune autre personne ne devait s'y impliquer.
Merci. Thank you very much, ladies. Yes, please.
One last thing. Please follow us. The website is privatesecurity.network. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. The book is here if you're interested, and the film, I believe, you'll be provided access through a safe channel. Thank you for attending.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Merci, mesdames.